Yeah, Veronica's going to open us up with a little reading.
Welcome and congratulations. I am delighted that you could make it. Getting here wasn't easy. I know. In fact, I suspect it was a little tougher than you realize. To begin with, for you to be here now, trillions of drifting atoms have somehow to assemble in an intricate and intriguingly obliging manner to create you. It's an arrangement so specialized in particular that it has never been tried before and will exist only this once. For the next many years, we hope, these tiny particles will uncomplainingly engage in all the billions of deft, cooperative efforts necessary to keep you intact and let you experience the supremely agreeable but generally underappreciated state known as existence. To be here now, alive in the 21st century, and smart enough to know it, you had also to be the beneficiary of an extraordinary string of biological good fortune. Not one of your pertinent ancestors was squashed, devoured, drowned, starved, stranded, stuck fast, untimely wounded, or otherwise deflected from its life quest of delivering a tiny charge of genetic material to the right partner at the right moment in order to perpetuate the only possible sequence of hereditary combinations that could result eventually, astoundingly, and all too briefly, in you. Science explores how it happened, in particular, how we went from being there, being nothing at all, to there being something, and then how a little of that something turned into us. This is the first of two readings that Bernie asked me to share to create context for his sermon this morning, and that was by Bill Bryson from A Short History of Nearly Everything. From another philosopher from a different time, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's Hymn of the Universe, I have the following reading, and it is a responsive reading, so if you'd like to read the you who lines in unison with me, feel free. Hymn to Matter. Blessed be you, harsh matter, barren soil, stubborn rock, you who yield only to violence. You who force us to work if we would eat. Blessed be you, perilous matter, violent sea, untamable passion. You who, unless we fet you, will devour us. Blessed be you, mighty matter, irresistible march of evolution, reality ever newborn. You who, by constantly shattering our mental categories, force us to go ever further and further in our pursuit of the truth. Blessed be you, universal matter, unmeasurable time, boundless ether, triple abyss of stars and atoms and generations. You who, by overflowing and dissolving our narrow standards of measurement, reveal to us the dimensions of God. Thank you.
First, an epigraph from the book of Deuteronomy. I'm now giving you the choice between life and death, between God's blessing and God's curse. And I call heaven and earth to witness the choice you make. Choose life. If there has been a unifying thread to my sermons here at GPCC so far, it has been what are other, if lesser known, contemporary ways some people have imagined being Christian. One of those is process theology, which was primarily formulated in the 1950s by Charles Hartshorne, who had been a student of the famed mathematician and philosopher Alfred North Whitehead. Hartshorne had modified Whitehead's process philosophy into a progressive type of Christian theology that attempts to address persistent problems of theodicy, which is a fancy theologian's term for the problem of evil. Why does an allegedly all-powerful and all-loving God allow suffering? As the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus put it, is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then evil? Process theology is primarily an attempt to bring Christianity up to date with contemporary scientific and historical evidence and offer a solution to the problem of evil. All mainline Protestant ministers of the last half century have been taught process theology in seminary, and many embrace it, albeit secretly. They've learned that the members of their churches don't really like it. So many of them keep this to themselves. Nevertheless, if you listen to their sermons with a keen ear, it is often present, if unacknowledged, in the content and arguments of their sermons, and it shows up in church songs like Good Fight, which we just sang. One of my goals today is to peel back this veil of secrecy. But first, some background. The last book contained in the Christian Bible is 2 Peter, written around 150 CE. It is necessary to go back and understand how people in the early church understood reality. First, the earth was the center of the cosmos. The sun, moon, stars revolved around us. And somewhere just beyond the dome of the sky was the realm of the gods, and in the case of the Jews, the one God. Reality, at some point in the not that distant past, had been created by a variety of gods in the case of the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, and by one God in the case of the Jews. In the case of the Egyptians, one God was thought to have simply spoken reality, including humans, into existence. This idea was later borrowed by the ancient Jewish writers for their creation story in Genesis 1. The ancients had no idea that our universe is 3.8 billion years old, resulting from a cosmic Big Bang, that our planet is 4.5 billion years old, that cellular life has been here for about 3.7 billion years, that multicellular life, about 600 million years ago, and humanity around 400,000 years old. Further, they had no idea that all life on Earth is formed via a process of natural selection, operating on millions upon billions of lives and deaths over the course of this mind-boggling span of time. And perhaps most important, far from being the center of the universe, our lonely, life-sustaining planet is in a remote outer spiral of an otherwise unnoteworthy galaxy that is just one of billions of such galaxies that are hurtling away from each other at unimaginable speeds. It has been less than 100 years since Edwin Hubble discovered that last item at the Mount Wilson Observatory above Pasadena. We've just barely begun to absorb that particular insight and what it means. Before that, our galaxy was thought to be static. The last 400 years of scientific discovery has been rough on that fragile human ego. As Freud noted, Copernicus and Galileo dislodged the planet from the center of the universe. Charles Darwin, Alfred Russel Wallace, and their precursors disclosed that humans were not an especially beloved creation of an omnipotent deity, but instead a fairly recent accidental descent from the animal kingdom, with an ineradicable animal nature, and finally, hurling the third and most irritating insult at humanity's mania for greatness, psychoanalysts showed us it is not even a master in its own home, but is dependent upon the most scanty information concerning all that goes on unconsciously in our psychic life. The process theologians recognized that much of what traditional Christianity had assumed as a given over the last 2 millennia has simply become untenable in the face of these revelations. The best part of presenting at GPCC. So what's a Christian theologian to do? Process theology turns upside down all the traditional Christian notions about God and reality. God, in the minds of the process theologians, is conceived as an overarching reality embedded in the very processes of reality, not some supernatural being presiding from some external realm. You can call it spirit of life, the great mystery, independent reality, divine unknown, or some other label of your own choosing. In process theology, the nature of God is creative, responsive love. God's nature involves urging all existence toward creative transformation. God is still understood as the creator of the universe, but this created reality is a process, a long, long series of event occasions, all of which are interdependent upon each other. It is not a bunch of material realities developed by the Creator. It is a series of what, in very nerdy language, the process theologians call concrescences, or comings into existence, of which everything in the universe partakes. God's role, now that God has gotten things rolling, is radically different from the omniscience, omnipotence, and judgment that often inhabits traditional Christianity. In process theology, God is always interacting with creation, and God's nature is relatedness with creation. God's nature is creative and responsive love. The Creator endowed each thing in the universe with the Creator's initial aim, which is, in process theologian John Cobb's words, to actualize the best possibilities open to it, given its concrete situation. If we and other beings who have emerged from this creative process do our very best to be in harmony by heeding God's initial aim, we will be making a moral, just, and beautiful world. But of course, we may live in such a way that we ignore our God-relatedness and do otherwise. Process theologians make it clear that we have the power of self-determination and may choose to be one with the initial aim or not. In our ongoing responsiveness to God and to others, we may choose either good or evil. God responds to the created world, to our choices, in sympathy and compassion, for God is interdependent with the created world, and so we affect the divine creative force, just as it affects us in infusing us with its creative initial aim. God is here, God is now, ever calling us to the highest. We are inescapably related to the divine, and our choices affect it. Our lives profoundly affect other living and non-living beings. In this complex web of interdependent processes, we have the options, in the famous words of Deuteronomy, of choosing death or choosing life. What are the ramifications of process theology? In my view, several aspects of process theology are most intriguing. First is its affirmation that the cosmos we experience through our senses is real. While it does not deny and indeed affirms an unseen superintelligence beyond that provided by our senses, the universe we experience through our senses is also real, not the illusion that some Asian and New Age religions suggest. Instead, process theology calls us to joyously embrace the material aspect of reality. Second, process theology answers the question, if God is all good and all loving, why is there evil? This question has long bedeviled efforts to articulate a coherent concept of God. While with near uniformity, those who, through whatever means, mystical, intuitive, or otherwise, believe they have encountered a divine reality, perceive that reality as good, loving, and benevolent. If this is so, why is there evil? Process theology posits that previous efforts to solve this riddle have run aground on the insistence that God is both all love and all powerful. To pithily summarize Epicurus, if God is all powerful, he is not all love. And if God is all love, he is not all powerful. All previous Christian theology has illogically insisted that both propositions are true. However, if God is all powerful, then at a minimum, God is responsible for existing evil. Because God is allowing evil she could prevent. In a radical departure from previous Christian thinking, process theology chooses instead to affirm that part of the biblical tradition which suggests that God does not have all controlling power. God does not allow or affirm evil. Indeed, God is constantly calling us to choose life, not death. However, the potential for evil is in the very structure of things. God is our co-creator with the rest of creation, including us humans. Because of our unique capacity for self-determination, moral evil can enter and has entered the world through our human choices. And process theology posits that God is literally without the power to prevent this outcome. God cannot compel her human co-creators to not choose evil. Let's explore this a bit further. In the view of process theology, evil exists, at least on this planet, because with the arrival of humans also arrived a true capacity for self-determination. And the capacity for self-determination brings with it an increased capacity to knowingly form ourselves in ways that provoke either good or evil. We bring moral evil into the world when, in the words of John Cobb, we form ourselves in such a way as to make ourselves objectively destructive elements in the environment of other humans and the earth as a whole. In other words, when we do this deliberately, understanding the consequences of our actions, we give birth to moral evil. Again, in Cobb's words, increasing the freedom of creatures was a risky business on God's part. But it was a necessary risk if there was to be a chance for greatness. Process theology does not totally absolve God of responsibility for moral evil. God did choose to allow a cosmic structure that would eventually allow for the arrival on the scene of true self-determination, with all the risks that entailed, including the risk of evil. God chose this, in the view of the process theologians, because God wanted a cosmos with a capacity for intense enjoyment and was willing to run the unavoidable risk of intense suffering. However, having made the choice, God is now literally without the power to force you, me, and all our fellow humans to act morally. The staggering consequence of process theology is we cannot avoid moral responsibility for the consequences of our actions. Satan does not make us do evil, and God cannot prevent us from doing evil. We bear sole responsibility. Further, the consequences of our actions are eternal. While process theology remains completely neutral and agnostic on the question of whether our individual personalities survive death, it affirms that in a very real sense, we are unavoidably eternal, because our choices will have eternal consequences. Process theology affirms Shakespeare's Antony. The evil that men do lives after them. In like manner, so too does the good we choose to do live eternally. In an image from my fundamentalist youth, God is indeed that still small voice that is always calling us to choose the good, and in this sense then, God is good. I will conclude with this quote from John Cobb, explaining his view of the call on our lives of process thought. For process theology, the future is truly open, and then means that there is no assurance that human beings will avoid those means now becoming available to destroy themselves. The danger is real, and an attitude of confidence that God will prevent the worst horrors is irresponsible. The God who permitted Auschwitz will permit anything the creatures choose to do. God is not another agent alongside the creatures. God acts only in them and through them. But the fact that the future is truly open also means that self-destruction is not inevitable. That which has never been may yet be. What has been until now does not exhaust the realm of possibilities. God offers to us opportunities to break out of our ruts, to see all things differently, to imagine what has never yet been dreamed. God works to open others to respond to the new visions and to implement them. This means entering into the adventure of the trusting life, even when we cannot foresee a favorable outcome. Trust is thus true responsibility, the ability to respond to the concrete situation that leads us to the new life we need. God lures, urges, and persuades. We decide. If we decide to enter into the reality into which God calls us, we choose life. If we decide to refuse it, we choose death, a continual dying throughout life and a contribution to planetary death. The choice of life, which is the choice of God's call, is the highest freedom. The refusal of life expresses bondage to the past and to the self, and it progressively reduces our capacity for freedom and life. Hope grows with the ability to respond. Despair grows with the self-chosen closing in of horizons. To be responsible in this context is not finally to shoulder an unendurable burden. It is to share in the divine adventure in the world, although its outcome is never assured, and although it entails the sacrifice of many past forms of enjoyment, in itself, it is joyful. The one who experiences the joy of this participation in the divine life hopes urgently for success, but accepts the risk that the only reward may be in the joy itself. Is there enough there to chew on for a few minutes?
I think so. We'll make it work.
Yes.
So I'm like 99% sure that what I'm going to say is probably not going to make sense.
Okay.
And the 1% chance that it does, sharing these questions are actually, I'm sort of at that midlife stage where I think I probably have more time that I've passed than what's in front of me. And I think that does put you in sort of this reflective space where existential questions have a sense of urgency, I guess. So for me, these are sort of interesting topics in a way that I think about them a lot. And so when you were talking about this, it kind of, it brought to mind these really cool little daily meditations, I guess, that I get from Richard Rohr. And his today was interesting because it kind of is related to what you were talking about today. This idea of God for us, we call you Father. God alongside us, we call you Jesus. God within us, we call you Holy Spirit. You are the eternal mystery that enables, enfolds, and enlivens all things, even us and even me. Every name falls short of your goodness and greatness. We can only see who you are and what is. We ask for such perfect seeing as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. This idea of perfect seeing. So I've been thinking through a lot of you get to a stage in your life where you can see all the things that you sacrificed for and what they yielded fruit. And you sort of realize that the satisfaction you thought they would bring you, it didn't necessarily bring you. And it brings you the sense of like, what's the whole point, right? So I used to actually, whenever I read about just the massive nature of the universe, it had this function of making me feel very small, right?
Right.
And which is a good thing, it's humbling. But one of the things that's been happening lately is I've gotten to a space where it actually makes me feel, in a way, because the universe is so massive and we are so tiny, that actually puts me back at the center of the universe in a way. Because matter out there, what makes us unique is not that, because matter's out there and there's so much of it. It's this idea of consciousness and matter coming together that makes us this unique center of the universe. And so then it's this idea that the paradoxes that we see in life, evil, good, strengths, are my very weaknesses. Things that make me strong are also the things that make me obnoxious, right? All these things, we view them as dualistic. But in fact, you can actually integrate them into a whole that makes things that seem nonsensical actually make sense, because the beauty, in some ways, going back to what you were saying, is in the process. But there's also a way in which you can become disheartened by that, or you can actually find encouragement, which is exasperating because it's all open-ended. So what I'm getting to say is all these questions have been really interesting to me, and I've been able to find meaning in the sense like the universe is so big. What makes us so special is that we are consciousness, this God sort of spirit that's been brought into matter. And putting those two things together is a very difficult, not difficult, it's a very different enterprise than what we keep hoping for, which is this perfection of consciousness, right? But we're not. It's a new thing. That is what we are. That's the Jesus. We're this incarnate thing of this process. But then it also is very encouraging to me because we've got to a place where, and I totally respect sort of the point of view that process is open and we can totally self-combust. And I think that there's an important truth in that makes us responsible for our actions, right? It gets away from this evangelical idea that I can do whatever I want because God will come and rescue me. But at the same time, it didn't really satisfy me, so I guess I sort of view it a little bit differently, and that is that this idea of time and process is in and of itself a product of consciousness, right? There is an argument to be made by people who are way so much smarter, way more smarter, that's saying it right, way smarter than I am, that time, this idea that things are unfolding in a linear fashion, is in itself non-existent, that we are, in essence, what's already started is already ending, has already ended. That God is the beginning. And that what we're experiencing the unfolding, and we're part of making that, creating that process, how beautiful, all of that is part of each one of us. I at least derive hope in this idea that God started a ball rolling that's already arrived at its destination, and that ultimately the makeup of the universe of life is like it thrives, like flowers that grow through concrete. So I have to believe that in the end, while I do believe it's a process, that I also believe that that process is ending, and it's ultimately ending in a good. It's already ended, and it's in a good place. And so I approach my life more from that perspective, that I'm building something, hopefully that's it.
Okay.
Sorry, that's.
I hear a lot of process thought in both what Richard Rohr was saying and in your own commentary upon that and my remarks. So thank you. Anyone else? Veronica?
So you know that my sister daughter Christina and I have to think of our favorite John Snyder and the concept of Tim shell, which he talks about. It used to be there. And that's actually from a Hebrew word of the Jewish tradition, but Dalmaeus, rather than thou shalt, Dalmaeus being the interpretation. And so we thought that there was a little process thought even there in that tradition.
So how many of you had ever heard the phrase process theology before this morning? Okay, so Jack was sharing with me that he encountered it when he was in a Catholic seminary back in the 60s. And I meant to bring along a book. It's called Introduction to Process Theology, a nice boring title by Robert Mesley, who's a philosopher, theologian at a college in Iowa. John Cobb, who I quoted in my sermon a fair amount, he and another process theologian named David Ray Griffin back in 1976 wrote a book called Process Theology and Introductory Exposition. And it's as dense as it sounds. I don't recommend it for anybody that, unless you have an aptitude for really dense philosophical writings. It's a good book. If you look at my copy, it's color-coded in like about 6 different shades of highlighter, which all mean different things. And I have just dissected it in detail. But if you don't want to do that, Robert Mesley's book, An Introduction to Process Theology, is very accessible and intended for the regular person to read and drink in. Jack?
Where does Pierre Teilhard de Chardin fit in?
Well, he would certainly be a type of process theorist. The thing that would maybe make him not strictly a process theologian is he was very teleological. And teleological is it's a linear phrase. The idea that there's a past and there's a future and we're heading to something. And so for Desjardins, he conceived that humanity was this ultimate thing. It was kind of like the coolest thing that evolution had ever produced. And he was considered heretical because this was back before Catholics could really bring themselves to accept that evolution was a thing and that it was real. And Desjardins was saying evolution is real, but it's a process by which this ultimate creation of God was going to be realized in the human being, and reaching this omega point was Desjardins' phrase. And so in that sense, unlike John Cobb, who's saying, yeah, we're kind of special, but we're kind of nasty too, and it may not turn out well. Whereas that idea doesn't seem to have occurred to Desjardins. So that's the quick answer to where he fits in the scheme of process thought.
Well, I think one of the things that we were saying was because we have the capacity to do good, that it's our responsibility to do it and do what we can to counteract the evil and people that are, causing all these problems. It's not to sit back and go, oh well.
Right.
I think that's somebody. Well, we're reading Christopher's book, which is wonderful. But the whole
All right. Any last commentary? I'll turn it back over to Serena.
Real quick, one more book that this made me think of. Have you read The Stranger?
Mike Camus.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes, I have.
This reminds me of absurdism and why absurdism is different from existentialism, because absurdism, even though it rejects God or the idea of God, it's about finding joy in that. And this just reminds me of the quotation from Deuteronomy that you said reminds me of when Rousseau says that he rejects the guillotine because when you're sentenced to death by the guillotine, you have to hope that it works the first time, and it makes you complicit in your own death, and then you can never be complicit in it, but you always have to reject the machine that will kill you.
Right. How about the plague? Have you read the plague?
I've read the Wikipedia summary.
I think that Albert Camus' other famous novel, The Stranger and the Plague, I think are the two that get taught in 10th grade English. The Plague is a story about the plague coming to a city in North Africa, and all the people that are quarantined within the walls of the city. Much literary criticism has been directed at, well, what is the plague in Camus' mind? Well, he wrote it in 1942, what was going on in 1942? We were in the midst of World War II. The Nazis seemed to be at some substantial risk of taking over the world. And the thing I love about the plague is I consider it a meditation on what is the moral person's duty in the face of seeming hopelessness. Camus' answer, spoiler alert, he says, the duty is to fight to your last breath no matter what.
It's just like Game of Thrones.
Except I didn't mess it up.
All right.
That was awesome. Yeah, I'm a little salty about Game of Thrones. We're gonna be done tonight. We'll see how I feel. I don't know. If I'm in tears next week, you'll know why. So if Deja Dan was right, and we are the culmination. You all right? If we are the culmination of evolution, if we're like there's something special, supposedly, I've got some questions at the end of everything. Because every day I wake up and something else is going on with my body. I don't feel special as I age. Let me put it that way. So we were in Mexico in Puerto Vallarta this past week, and I gotta tell you, I'm gone for a week, and it was like everything went to hell in 1 week with legislation and laws. I was like, apparently I'm not allowed to leave the country because something's going on here.
It's not your fault.
It was wild. It was wild. And then there was a temptation. It's like, should we just stay here? I wouldn't do that to y'all though. But I think these conversations that Bernie was having today about these different types of theologies that are so contrary to what you hear in most churches that aren't anything new, have been going on for centuries. They're just not prominent because they don't align with the conservative evangelical agenda. I think these conversations are imperative because the church is leading the charge in a lot of this noxious legislation that is just being cranked out state after state. If we don't have these conversations, especially in the church and in this country, we run the risk of this world burning due to a climate crisis. If we don't have these conversations in the church, in this country, then legislation like what's happening in Alabama, in Ohio, in Georgia, those things are going to keep happening. And something has to be done about it. We can't passively sit on the sidelines anymore. We have to stop being in the middle of the road and playing nice with fanatics. And I hate to say that, but we've done that long enough. Nothing's changed. Loving them in their, where they're at right now from the pulpit isn't doing anybody a damn bit of good, all right? We have to stop coddling bigotry in the church. It's time to draw a line. Now, that does not mean that we have to agree about process theology or Calvinism or Molinism or Arminianism or open theism or trajectory theology. There's a lot more isms in theology, y'all. This was just one ism that we did an overview. We don't have to agree on that kind of stuff. Okay? But what matters is that love and justice manifests in our actions and our policies for all of creation. That's what matters. We have to start separating ourselves from conservative Christian fanatics and making a stand against those whose theology is contrary to love and justice. We have to start doing it. We can no longer wait. Now, we can disagree on some things, and we can restrict ourselves individually. For example, maybe you believe personally that because of your religious beliefs, you cannot have an abortion. Cool. Don't have one. Maybe you believe that it's not okay for you to participate in certain sexual activities. Now, I may disagree with that, and I think that might hurt you personally, but at the end of the day, it's your decision. If you don't want to do that, fine, don't. And if you're heterosexual, if you're trying to force yourself into trying something that you're not naturally, it's going to be awkward for everybody involved, so please just don't. All right? You can do that. Okay, but what you can't do is control others because of your beliefs. And you cannot back that up biblically at all. That is not sacred, that is fascist, period. Now, what we cannot disagree on, capital can't, is loving orphans and immigrants. And I've been asking myself all week if Al-Qaeda is apparently unaware that poor immigrant children and poor citizens that are children in this country, are they not aware that those kids have heartbeats? Because somebody should get them the memo, all right? This whole restrictive abortion ban stuff is nonsense. The Bible doesn't discuss it at all, but what it discusses over and over and over again is caring for people that are in poverty and people that are suffering and people that are refugees. There is no argument about this. And that's where the attentions of the church needs to lie. And anybody else that's distracting the church, it's time for us in this room to take a stand against the Al-Qaeda. Somebody coined that phrase this week, and I love it. I'm going to use it every week from now. So as we take communion together today, I want to invite you to take it as a symbol of us committing to pick up the pieces that's called the church. Because it's fractured, it's broken, and that brokenness is obvious when we see what's being penned into our legislation in the name of a God that is so counter to the God we believe in. I don't know if you noticed, but the God that Bernie discussed today and the God of politicians from Georgia and Ohio and Texas, those gods don't sound anything alike. That's because they're not. And it's time for the church to start saying so we can mend this world. Because if we don't, I'm terrified for the babies in this world that are going to grow up in a world that is so desperate to see love surrounding them when all they see is hell emerging in every direction. And until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you, and may it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace to you.